China's annual political meetings are setting the tone for its legislative year with the 15th five-year plan. Leaders are focusing on improving people's livelihoods, promoting high-quality growth and accelerating technological innovation, all key parts of China's drive toward modernization and further opening up. Beijing also says it wants to strengthen multilateral cooperation and support a fair global trading system, goals it believes are under strain amid U.S. moves toward unilateralism and trade protectionism. Later, we'll speak with Stein, president of the U.S.-China Business Council, about how Beijing and Washington could work together to fuel global economic growth. But first, we take a look at the international community's view and expectations of these meetings. I spoke with the former president of Costa Rica, Chinchilla. Chinchilla, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a true pleasure to be with you today.
Now, during your presidency, you hosted President Xi Jinping in Costa Rica. That was a visit in 2013 that resulted in a free trade agreement between Costa Rica and China. The countries, of course, now also share a strategic partnership. How would you say relations have evolved?
Well, trade and investment between Costa Rica and China have evolved from minimal interaction to a strong partnership, with China becoming Costa Rica's second largest trading partner. And that happens following the 2011 free trade agreement. This bilateral agreement has allowed our trade to grow at an annual rate since then of about 10% every year. So yes, it has been very important, not only in terms of how trade is growing, but also in terms of giving us the opportunity to diversify our exportable offer. So the general balance is quite positive for both countries, but especially for Costa Rica.
Now, of course, the world will be watching China's upcoming two sessions meetings. Lawmakers are expected to implement the 15th five-year plan, which emphasizes high-quality development. There'll be a big focus on things like technology, energy, and development in the digital sector as well. What are your hopes for these meetings?
Well, of course, it is going to be a very positive, very positive to hear about the kind of domestic measures that China will emphasize during those meetings, like the ones you already mentioned about incentivizing innovation policies to boost economic growth, and its commitment with strengthening the clean energy sector. We need to recognize that China is currently recognized, or is considered as one of the global leaders in terms of technological development in general, and especially in green technologies. But in addition, we will love to hear about China commitments in supporting through bilateral cooperation and also through the multilateral system with other countries, the less developed countries, in promoting their commitment with clean energies and a innovation-based development patterns.
Right, and talking about clean energy and protecting the environment, Costa Rica has also made significant progress in these sectors. In 1985, for instance, if we look at Costa Rica, it had the highest deforestation rate in the world. Well, one of the highest, I should say, losing more than 404 hectares a year. Today, forests blanket well over half of Costa Rica, making it one of the few places on Earth to revive that lost ecosystem at that time. What do you attribute to Costa Rica's success, and is there anything that other countries can take away from your experience?
Well, in first place, thank you for mentioning this and for recognizing the efforts that Costa Rica has embraced when it comes to sustainable environment. This is a task that we started even before this issue of sustainability became a global issue. Everything started around the 1970s in the past century, and it has to do basically with the national consensus that we were able to reach. Besides the policies in terms of protecting important parts of our territory, in terms of innovating on financial and fiscal instruments, we invested in education. So sustainability is, I will say that, is part of the Costa Rican DNA. Every government that is elected brings even stronger policies to continue with this path in favor of sustainability. My advice to the rest of the countries and leaders is that they don't have to choose between growing or protecting the environment. Costa Rica is the best example that you can do both.
Right, and in Costa Rica, it must have been something of a multidisciplinary approach because, as you talked about, of course, you need finance for these things. You need the right policies to be in place, and of course, you need people to be on your side as well to achieve the outcomes that you have.
Exactly. Even the private sector, of course, there are tensions. From time to time, you have these discussions about how to be more flexible in terms of the protecting the environment. But fortunately, we also have now the possibility of accessing better technology, so you cannot you don't need to sacrifice, again, the modernization or the growth of the economy in terms of protecting the environment. So that kind of integration of policies is possible, and Costa Rica is the best example of this.
Right. You mentioned a moment ago that China is now the world's largest manufacturer and exporter of new green technologies. We talk about solar, wind, and of course, electric vehicles. And Costa Rica has embraced Chinese electric vehicles. There was one headline which put it very well. It said, "To see the future of EVs, visit Costa Rica." What has made Chinese EVs so popular in Costa Rica?
Well, I will say that not only in Costa Rica, when you travel around Latin America, you will see the same kind of situation. But in our case, yes, the market for Chinese electric vehicles is growing. And I will mention especially two important, probably, elements that explain this situation. One is government incentives that promote electric mobility. And the second one is the competitiveness of the Chinese car industry, especially on electric cars. So incentives such as tax exemptions and reduced registration fees make the EVs more affordable, and it also at the same time is supporting our country's sustainability goals. In addition, again, Chinese brands offer a variety of affordable and advanced electric vehicles responding to a diverse consumer needs in our market.
Right, you mentioned Chinese competitiveness. That's the whole range and diversity of vehicles that are on offer, that are exported by China, as well as the government incentives that are offered in Costa Rica. But how big a challenge was it to set up the infrastructure to accommodate these new technologies?
Well, yes, probably that is our pending task. I am sure that when we can resolve the issue of infrastructure in terms of providing access to all the consumers of EVs in Costa Rica for example, charging systems, the market will grow even more. The government and the authorities are working on this, and I'm sure that Costa Rica will follow this path.
Now, in January, you assumed the role of president of the Club de Madrid. That's an organization that champions democracy and multilateralism. And we know that the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, is no supporter of multilateralism. And he has withdrawn this country from many key international organizations and agreements, things like the Paris Climate Accord for one. He's also withdrawn from the World Health Organization for another. And the president here has also made tariffs a centerpiece of his foreign policy in many respects. How has that affected Costa Rica?
Multilateralism is not only important in terms of guarantee peace, stability, and security in the world, although we recognize that there are many reforms that must be introduced to the multilateral system so it can respond more effectively and in a timing manner. However, the opposite, I mean, destroying multilateralism will have a very high cost, not only for the world at large, but especially for small countries like Costa Rica. My country has been able to become in a kind of success story during the last years in terms of economic modernization and growth, in terms of human development, in terms of democracy and stability, thanks to the multilateral system. Now, concerning the unilateral decisions that have been taken by President Trump on tariffs, fortunately, those days we are receiving good news. Most of the products that we are exporting to the United States are going to be excluded from the new tariffs, and only a small part of those exports are going to be punished with the 15% of tariffs. However, we hope that we can compete even with these new tariffs. And I will say that probably the most concerning issue is certainty. We would love to have more clearer rules, because certainty is the most important element for investors to make their decisions when they decide to come to Costa Rica.
Lara Chinchilla, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
We now turn our discussion to the United States, where analysts are keenly watching this year's two sessions. Earlier, I spoke with Stein, president of the US-China Business Council. Sean, great to have you with us. We've got the very important two sessions meetings, which are coming up in China. Policymakers around the world, especially here in the United States, will be looking very closely at these meetings. What are global CEOs hoping will come out of it?
Yeah, so this isn't just any two sessions, because this two sessions is going to be the two sessions, but it's also going to be the formal release of the next 5-year plan. And so what I think is really important to emphasize is that the global companies, global CEOs, care deeply about the state of the Chinese economy, right? The better the Chinese economy is doing, the better it is for everybody. The more efficient the Chinese economy is working, the more efficient it is for everybody. So I think the first thing they're going to be looking for is what signals are we getting about how the economy is going to be managed and what's the direction of the economy over the next year. So they might be looking at things like, what are we doing, say, on either stimulus, or what's going to happen with targets for demand or targets for inflation or deflation and those kind of things. So I think that's the first thing that they'll be looking for. I think the second thing they'll be looking for is, if you're a global business in China, the Chinese government often talks about how important it is to keep the door open for foreign investment. But companies are always worried that that door may be starting to close, because here and there is always examples of where there become new challenges that arise for foreign companies. That's not unique to American companies. You'll hear the same thing from European companies or from Japanese companies. And so, again, looking for clear signs that China remains open and encourages both foreign investment and wants foreign investors to come and prosper and be successful along with Chinese companies. I think maybe the third thing, which we'll be watching for, is, again, is where is China going on the broader regulatory front? There are lots of issues that have been raised with the Chinese government and issues that the Chinese government has surfaced itself as challenges for foreign investors. And do we see concrete steps being taken to follow through on some of the planned and announced reforms? So I'd say those are the big three.
Right. So China has in the past, in fact over the last few years, given the undertaking that it is opening up, as it puts it. It's opening up its economy. It wants more investment. So you will be looking closely at investment opportunities that will come out of these two sessions.
Yeah, so I think not just investment opportunities, this is a place where I think we've had some very fruitful discussions with the Chinese government.
Yeah.
I remember the Chinese government talking about, here are the ways that we have opened over the last period of time. And then when we talk to companies, foreign companies, they don't feel that. And so often if you're a policymaker, there are steps that you take that you think may be affecting and improving the business climate, but it's not felt by the companies, meaning it doesn't translate into actual practice. Or, sometimes national level practice may not be fully implemented at the local level. And so that's what I mean by saying it's absolutely clear that the goal of the Chinese government is to open up. But often it requires a lot more than just national level policy or regulations to really affect it, that opening up. And that's what they'll be looking for is, are we going to be seeing even more efforts to take this national vision of opening up and implement it down to the local level and elsewhere so that, in fact, it's not just a goal that's opening up, but it's something that's felt by global companies and global investors.
Well, let's look at some of the sectors where there are opportunities for greater cooperation, a win-win strategy, as China puts it. Let's take green energy technologies. Here is a sector where China is leading in the world right now. It's the world's biggest producer of green technologies, things like wind power, solar power as well. It's the biggest exporter as well. Where do you see cooperation between the two countries in this particular sector?
Yeah, no, China's absolutely the world leader in this, and there is no decarbonization without some China component of that strategy. What I hear from, say, American utility companies is that China's done a lot of innovations in things like smart grid, grid management, rapid power generation, power storage, and all of those things. And those were all areas that I think the U.S., as we try and grow the electricity supply and power generation capacity in the United States, I think that's a case where if the U.S. is going to do that fast, it needs to do it with, it's going to have Chinese products, Chinese equipment, and maybe China expertise. So absolutely building out energy infrastructure is one of those areas that's really important.
These two countries are the two biggest economies in the world. How would you characterize the trade and economic relationship between the two countries and the current state of trade relations?
Yeah, I want to sort of tug on that, because I think that if you just say they're the two biggest economies, you're missing the most important part. It's not just that they're the two biggest economies, they're the two most dynamic economies and the two most innovative economies. And it's when you add the innovation piece and the dynamism piece that you really recognize the need for the two countries to find ways to work together more effectively. And so what does that mean sort of in practice? I think what that means is, the best example for me right now is life science. I just saw a report that said globally, 37% of the new molecules, that's the highfalutin word they use to talk about new drugs, were developed in China. 37%. 5 years ago, 5%. And so China's ability to innovate and scale in drug discovery has really grown. And so that's definitely an area where we see interest on the part of Western companies and Chinese companies to leverage each other's strengths. But also that's a place where I think it's a safe space for governments to say, okay, we're talking about human lives, we're talking about, working on cancer or diabetes or these important things. That becomes a safe space where we think that there's really great opportunity for the two sides to work together. But again, it's not just the size of the economies, it's the innovation and dynamism that underpins those economies that make that kind of cooperation significant and useful.
Would it be fair to say then, Sean, that this is not really about competition, it's more about synergy?
It should be about synergy. But both sides, we still have a very intensely competitive relationship, right? I think one of the dominant themes between the two countries right now is we've got, on the U.S. side, you've got the U.S. trying to figure out how do we minimize potential Chinese leverage over the U.S. economy. That might be things like critical minerals and rare earths, or it might be in drugs or whatever. And we have the same concern on the Chinese side, trying to identify what are areas that the United States could potentially have leverage over our economy, and how do we eliminate that leverage. And so that kind of de-risking strategy absolutely exists and is not going to really go anywhere. I think that's a dynamic that I think has now hit that unavoidable stage. So on top of this baseline of de-risking and trying to eliminate the other side's leverage, that's where you get the opportunities for synergy, right? And so you've got to look at the Venn diagram of where is it in the U.S. interest and capability, and where is it in the Chinese interest and capability without overlapping with national security. And that's absolutely where the corporate sector is looking for those areas where the U.S. and China can work together to deliver better outcomes, whether it's better outcomes for economic outcomes in China or the U.S., or health, or energy solutions, but that's absolutely the place that the corporate sector is.
Now, we have seen trade tensions between the United States and China.
That was quite the understatement.
Yes. I mean, they've ebbed and flowed, these trade tensions. Sometimes they've been very high, sometimes they've lowered. What do you think needs to be done to lower these trade tensions? Because corporations, businesses, they want certainty. Yeah. They want to know where their money is safe. Where, they look to the future as well. So what needs to be done to create that kind of stability?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides to this issue. The most important is, I think, for most companies, the biggest breakthrough that happened in Busan was only after Busan did we finally get a modicum of stability and predictability. And so obviously one of the big goals is to see how long can we keep this sort of in place so that companies can make these decisions. Is it safe to invest in production in China or the US or everywhere? So that's the biggest thing, is how do we get this to extend? And so I think what the corporates think is that where we've seen progress happen the most rapidly in the relationship is when you actually have the leader-to-leader level discussions. Often when it's done at a lower level, then I think both sides are much more cautious. It's only when the two leaders connect that they can express a vision and then things can move forward. And so I think really, in the eyes of the business community, the most important milestones that will be coming up over the next year are the leader-to-leader engagements that give confidence and direction to people under them to continue to move forward, not just in a direction of stability, but to then find areas that you can work together so that we're not just keeping the relationship at the same low base level, but looking for ways to start to bring it back up. But leader-to-leader contact is by far the most important.
Yeah, and when we talk about trade tensions and what is happening, I mean, there is a perception that the two countries are moving away from each other, that companies are moving away from each other. We hear the D word, decoupling, all the time. But you say, no, that's not happening. In fact, what we are seeing is a deepening of ties.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is, a couple of things. What we're not seeing is, I keep seeing this narrative that American companies are pulling out of China. The data does not support that. There's been virtually no companies pulling out of China except where tariffs have made business completely untenable. And so that's understandable, but everything else, no one is leading China. What we do see is, we see two things. We see companies trying to make supply chains more resilient. And so the two things we see, in some cases, that means their Chinese customers, Chinese companies, need a more resilient supply chain. That means you increase your investment in China to give them greater security about that. But it also means that globally, you've got companies, Chinese companies and American companies, often together, going into third countries to create another node in the supply chain. So it's not just all China or not just North America, but you've got either North America plus one or China plus one. One of the most interesting parts of that, I think, is the automotive sector, where time and again, when I would see an American company investing somewhere outside of China in automotive, they would be going along with their Chinese counterparts. They'd be doing it together. Sometimes it was led by the US side, sometimes it was led by the Chinese side. But the fact that they were doing it together shows me just how entwined some of these networks are. And that's where I think companies are, is trying to have more stability, more resilient supply chains, but sometimes that's being done in companionship or in partnership with longstanding Chinese stakeholders.
Right, that brings me a point that you talked about in a speech last May. You offered an alternative to a very commonly held view that it's the US market alone that determines global business trends, that dictates that. How do you see Chinese business leaders, investors, entrepreneurs shaping this changing environment?
That is the most incredible misperception, I think, that's out there. It's undeniable that the largest consumer market in the world is the United States. But for many sectors, the largest market in the world is in China, right? So there are sectors where you've got US is the dominant market and the place where China is. And I think the advantage you have as a company is depending on what your sector is, you sort of are going to focus on where is your market, where is your supply chain, where is your platform. And so in some cases it means more investment in China, and other times it means more on the US side.
Now, China's goal is to modernize its healthcare system. So how can the two countries put their resources together, cooperate, and make this happen?
Yeah, no, I think China's progress in that area has been absolutely extraordinary. This has been a long-term initiative on the part of the Chinese government. What we've seen, though, despite all of the great progress, is that often sometimes it's difficult for the Chinese government to engage effectively with the private sector, especially the foreign private sector. And the foreign private sector often feels like it's challenging to engage with the Chinese government. So even though they've got shared goals on how do we modernize, say, healthcare treatment, or how do we better deal with elder care, often you need sort of a platform to help bring them together. That's what we tried to do, is to let government agencies, think tanks, and business all get together to talk about some of these issues, to look at ways that they can work better together and they can have better understanding.
What about things like governance, like regulatory innovation, like financing?
Yeah, that's important too. Obviously, companies, global companies deal with these issues around the world. And so, people think that if you've got a global life science or pharmaceutical company talking with the Chinese government, that maybe they're just talking about the US regulatory system. And sometimes they are. But often they'll do compare and contrast. Here's how it worked in Japan. Here's how it worked in Europe. Here's how it worked in Singapore. And that's something that the big global companies can bring. And that is a global perspective to see the different ways that some of these challenges of healthcare finance, healthcare regulation can be managed. Because there isn't any one model that's right for every place. But by being able to bring a number of examples, I think helps deepen the debate and deepen the understanding, and ultimately deliver better outcomes on the policy front, which helps us for what really matters is how do you get better patient outcomes.
Right, so you adapted to the environment, to the situation on the ground.
Right, and that's what Chinese policymakers are really good at. Often what they need is, like everywhere, Chinese policymakers are busy. They can't necessarily go and spend a week in Singapore, then a week in France, then a week in Canada, and a week in the US. And so one way to shortcut through some of that is by working with global partners that operate in multiple markets where you can have conversations about what are different solutions and how can they work. And that's just one of the ways that I think we try and bridge sort of this gap between policymaking and industry.
Sean, great having you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was an honor. I appreciate it.
And we need to leave it there. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching another edition of The Heat.